The WK-342 is the standalone behavior intervention plan that we have available through WebKids. This is a little bit different than the behavior intervention plan and FBA combo. This is a more simple version of that. And so I'm going to walk you through what that looks like. As with any of our forms, if you see anything in yellow in a box at the top of your form or anywhere throughout, those are simply reminders and tips and tricks for you to be able to complete the form. So none of that yellow stuff is going to print on any of your actual paperwork, but do be mindful because it provides lots of good information on how to complete the form and specific reminders. So if we come down to the actual form we're filling out, the form will generate the student's name for you. It will put in their attendance building for you. In this case, this is not a real student or real data, so I don't have that entered. If you see that it's missing, simply go to your demographics page and make sure you have attendance building selected, and then when you come back, it should show up. Created on is your date that you made the plan, and then revised on is going to be any date that you make a revision. So as we come down here, it indicates in this little notification, which does print out, that the plan will go into effect on the date that the written consent was received from the legal education decision maker, and it's going to remain in effect until you either revise it, rewrite it, or it's terminated via PWN. So it's just a little disclaimer at the top that lets people know when it will go into effect and how you can revoke it if necessary. So the behavior intervention plan, when you look at these in the actual entry form, sometimes it looks a little overwhelming because we now have these very useful RTE or rich text editor boxes that have all these different options for you to copy, to paste, to make tables, to insert images. So when we go to print this, none of this is actually going to show up. It's just going to be whatever you put in the box. So it will look a lot less busy when you actually go to print it. So the first section we have is, look over here, you can see it's the behavior or behaviors of concern. So if I have behavior number 1, describe the behavior of concern and list the behavior in a separate text box, maximum of 3 behaviors. So right here, we would enter our data for whatever the behavior is for behavior 1. And then we also want to have our baseline data because that's going to help us with a goal. The nice thing about using the RTE or the rich text editor boxes are that you can do a lot of that copy and paste you couldn't do with just the old text boxes that we had. Or you can even create data and tables with your baseline data in here if that's the case and that's easier for you. So let's say, for example, I just make something up here. Let's pretend like our behavior of concern is, so we want to call this behavior. This is kicking. It's pretty aggressive, but maybe we want to put frequency. Luckily, it has some spelling features in there for you, and maybe duration or whatever it is that you're tracking. None of these are going to be exactly the same. They're going to be unique to that student and what their needs are. So let's say perhaps my data included frequency for kicking, and maybe that frequency was per week, right? So maybe it was 8 times this week that student was kicking, and for anywhere from 0 to 3 minutes or whatever the case is. Whatever your data is, you type it in this area here. You can do it in paragraph format. If you have tables, you can create a table in here. You can copy and paste. That's the beauty of the RTE or rich text editor boxes. So once you're completed with that behavior, you can come down to the next box and it says, describe the behavior of concern, behavior number 2. So if there is a secondary behavior on that plan that the team wants to address as part of the behavior intervention plan, you would do the same thing here for box 2, and then the same thing for behavior 3. A lot of people say, well, what if there's only one behavior? I only want to target one thing. That's absolutely and perfectly fine. If you don't want these boxes to print, you just make them blank, and the only thing that shows up when you print now is the one that you put in. So those are pre-populated there for you to have multiple behaviors. We recommend not doing more than 3 at one time in order to increase your effectiveness of your intervention. So once you have your behavior of concern in there, the next section is your replacement behavior. So same thing here, describe what behavior the student should exhibit instead of the behavior. So maybe instead of kicking, what is it we want the student to do instead? Maybe they say, I need a break, or maybe they take a timeout card and go cool down, or maybe they have a sensory box. Whatever the case is, you're going to indicate what would be a more appropriate behavior that we're going to teach this student that would be acceptable in place of the target, which would be, in this example we talked about here, was kicking. So you're going to enter your text there. Same thing for your behavior 2 and behavior 3. They're probably all going to have different replacements. In this example, we only had one behavior, so all I have to do is delete that. And it's not going to print. It's only going to print this one. Instructional methods is very important because this gives your staff the information they need to be able to implement the plan and teach those replacement behaviors. So that's what this section is over here. Again, it does look a little bit distracting because of the boxes, but if we take those boxes away for visual effect, you won't have all the options. So we did leave them in there for you. So one of the prompts here is, how will the replacement behavior be taught and when will it be taught? Okay, so you enter your how and when here. Okay, for replacement behavior 2, we didn't do one. We didn't have 3 different behaviors, right? If I did, I would put the information in. Because I don't, I can delete it and it's not going to print. So on the instructional methods piece, it gives you some examples. This is not a checklist for everyone just to go crazy and pick everything. This is for ease of use. So if you are going to teach anger management skills, or you're going to use a behavior contract, absolutely mark those boxes. If none of these things are something you're going to do as part of your instruction, then you do not want to mark those. You would want to click other and then describe that over here in that box. Once you've figured out your instructional methods, you always want to make sure you have assigned someone who's responsible for this so we can make sure that it gets done. So you have the option to say, is it the primary provider, the related service person? Maybe it's a social worker. Maybe it's general ed staff within the classroom for a student getting inclusion services. And if it's none of those, remember, you can always type other. One thing that you have to remember when using a box that has other, or when you have a drop down and underneath it there is a box, this box underneath is only for the other column. People often say, hey, my information got deleted and it's not there. So for example, let's say that I am the primary provider and I put that in there like this with Amber Latta. And then when I come back and work on it later, or I click save, I get upset because guess what? It's now gone. Well, you're looking at the person responsible, which is whomever the primary provider is. The reason we did this is because maybe next year, Amber will not be the primary provider. Maybe it will be Susan, right? So if you want to be specific as to an actual person and you want it to save the name, then I could do that. And when I come up and click save, if you use the other box, it will save it for you. Okay, but if you just use one of these, it's just going to go and default to whomever happens to be that primary provider or related service person at the time. You can always explain more in the boxes if you feel like you need to explain further. The next section is the prevention strategies. So what are we going to do to prevent these behaviors, or this, in our case example, we had one behavior. What do we want to do to prevent that kicking, right? Well, maybe we want staff to avoid physical contact. If the student's upset, you get near them, they start, hurting you physically. So avoiding physical contact. Maybe we offer a structured environment, staff proximity, whatever the case is. You may pick and choose these, and you may leave them all blank. They are there not for you because you have to choose one, but because those are frequent ones that people tend to choose. You have the option of other, and then anything you want to put as a prevention strategy, you describe in the box over here. So I would enter my text here, enter my charts, graphs, pictures, whatever I've got. And then for behavior 2, I would enter it here. On our example, we don't have any of those. So I would simply delete it and it won't print. Again, pick the person responsible for those preventative behaviors. And maybe you're saying, well, it's not all these, it's everybody. So you could specify all staff, and then you wouldn't be limited to just one person being responsible. Or maybe you're going to have all SPED staff be in charge because you have a para in the classroom and the general education teacher is not able to provide that at that moment. When you come down to intervention, this is the strategies that you're going to use to intervene when that behavior occurs. So you've got your strategies here. Again, not necessarily multiple choice, but these are some very common strategies people use. And then we have other. So regardless of what you choose, maybe you're going to offer a break and do something else, right? So you come over here. What are those steps that we should do? And what is the intervention? You enter your text here. Behavior 2 goes here. We don't have one. This example does not have a behavior 3, but that's where you would put it. Again, person responsible. Okay. And maybe in this one, it would be special education staff, right? Maybe it's a para who's in the classroom. That's none of these, right? So maybe you would want this to say SPED staff. When you come down to the consequences, you always have to include positive and negative consequences. You don't want to limit a behavior plan to simply one. In some cases, it may be necessary, but we offer the option to insert positive and negative consequences. So some of the common examples are listed here. And some of the common examples are listed here. This does not mean you have to choose one of these and that is what you use. If you do not like any of these or they do not fit the circumstances for your student, click Other. And either way, you're going to describe that down here in the box. Here's the example of the consequences that are positive, and here's the example of the negative consequences. Who is responsible for providing those to the student? Maybe there's a reward at the end of every day, and they go back and see their special ed teacher for that reward. So that's where you'd include that. I think perhaps other than the prevention of a behavior is the crisis response, because occasionally, despite our best efforts, students still are sometimes escalated beyond that point of intervention, and then crisis response or emergency interventions are necessary. So you always want to have that planned out in case you come to a situation where that is necessary, and that way staff knows exactly what they're supposed to do to intervene in an emergency or a crisis. So this just gives you some prompts. Describe the triggers that might precede the behavior. It gives everyone the heads up it's coming. Describe the behavior signals that can alert staff that they're entering the phase. Maybe you've taught a warning sign to a student and they give you the thumbs down, and you know that that's a signal that needs, you need an emergency intervention. Or most commonly used is describe in detail the steps to be followed when these strategies are not effective. So in the use of emergency safety interventions, ESI, seclusion, restraint, whatever, be sure to indicate when the use of them is necessary and make sure that's included in that child's IEP as well. And then the person responsible for notifying the parent or guardian of an emergency crisis situation. A lot of times people will have administration. Sometimes they leave it to the primary provider, whoever that is, maybe school counselor. That wasn't on there, so maybe you'd select other and put school counselor. Progress monitoring is a big piece of behavior plans that often gets overlooked. So we did include that for you. What method are you going to use to communicate the progress? Are we going to use charts and graphs? Is the student going to use a behavior tracking sheet? Maybe both. Or what other way are we going to communicate that? Maybe they phone call home every Friday or, something like that. So you want to make sure that you're listing the frequency. If you happen to have charting that goes home weekly and behavior tracking sheets that go home daily, you could click Other and describe that below. So that's why you have an Other box there, because you want to make sure that you're individualizing this plan for that student. So enter your text here, describe that information, and then you are done completing the form. So when you display to print, it looks much nicer because now the only things that will show up are the things that you completed and not all the extra spaces. If you have any questions about the WK-342, be sure to email Brian or Amber at webkids.org. Thank you.